Have you ever stopped to imagine what life was truly like for those who lived closest to queens and royalty hundreds of years ago? We're constantly fed images of glittering crowns, dazzling jewels, and magnificent feasts that seem straight out of a fairy tale. But here's the shocking truth that history books conveniently forget to mention. Behind those towering palace walls, life was anything but glamorous. The royal courts of the medieval era, the Victorian period, and countless other points throughout history were not the elegant, sparkling worlds you think they were. They were cesspools of filth, suffocating stench, and constant danger. Places where a single mistake could literally cost you your life. And who bore the brunt of this hidden misery? The very people who served the queens closest, their so-called loyal servants. Today, we're tearing down the curtain of royal perfection and exposing the disturbing reality that history rarely dares to tell. Brace yourself, because what you're about to hear will shatter every fairy tale fantasy you've ever had about queens and their courts. This is going to get dark and downright disgusting. If you're imagining sweet-smelling perfumes and glittering bathtubs filled with rose water, think again. Hygiene standards in the past were almost completely non-existent. During the medieval era, bathing was actually considered suspicious by many people. The prevailing belief was that bathing in warm water opened up your pores, allowing diseases to seep directly into your body like some kind of microscopic invasion. So, queens, just like everyone else around them, might only bathe once every few months, if they were lucky. Instead of actually washing themselves, they layered their unwashed bodies with heavy perfumes, powders, and oils in a desperate attempt to mask the overwhelming odor of accumulated filth. Now imagine being the servant responsible for dressing them each morning. You weren't just helping them slip into their elaborate gowns. You were dealing with weeks or even months of sweat, grime, and unwashed skin that had been marinating in expensive fabrics. And those magnificent dresses everyone admires in paintings, they were almost never properly washed. Instead, servants were expected to scrape off visible filth with crude tools, brush away crumbs and dust particles, and make these revolting garments somehow look presentable for public appearances. Even by the Victorian era, things had only improved slightly. While wealthy people might bathe more frequently, perhaps once or twice per week, indoor plumbing was still incredibly rare, and toilets, as we know them today, barely existed. Instead, queens and nobles used chamber pots, which were essentially portable toilets kept right there in their bedrooms. And guess who had the delightful job of cleaning those out multiple times every single day? Can you picture yourself waking up at dawn and carrying a pot full of human waste down the narrow, winding staircases of a cold stone castle? That was your daily reality as a servant. If you think your garbage can smell terrible after sitting for a week, imagine the nauseating scent of a royal court, where hundreds of people were packed together without any proper sanitation systems. The air in a queen's private chambers would be a horrific mixture of stale sweat, unwashed hair, cheap perfume attempting to mask body odor, rotting food scraps, and that chamber pot sitting in the corner like some kind of aromatic nightmare. Servants were constantly surrounded by this suffocating stench, and there was absolutely no escaping it, not even when you tried to sleep. Being a servant wasn't just degrading and humiliating, it was often a literal death sentence. In an age when basic hygiene knowledge was almost non-existent, deadly diseases spread faster than gossip in a royal court. Servants were the unfortunate souls tasked with handling all the filth that no one else would dare touch. Dirty laundry caked with dried sweat and blood, unwashed bedding that was literally crawling with vermin, and those chamber pots brimming with waste. Every single day meant direct, prolonged contact with bodily fluids that could easily carry fatal illnesses. Smallpox, tuberculosis, and even the dreaded plague haunted the halls of noble estates like invisible assassins, and servants were almost always the very first to fall seriously ill. They lived and worked in cramped, poorly ventilated quarters where sickness passed from one person to the next like wildfire consuming dry wood. Parasites were absolutely everywhere. Lice, fleas, and bedbugs thrived in the folds of royal garments and mattresses, creating entire ecosystems of disgusting creatures. And if your queen or master happened to have lice crawling through their hair, it became your job to painstakingly remove them one by one, all while risking having those little monsters leap straight into your own hair. Unlike their wealthy employers, who could afford the best medical care available, servants had virtually no access to doctors or any kind of treatment. If they became sick or too weak to perform their duties effectively, they were simply left to suffer in complete silence. Many died and were replaced as easily as someone might replace a worn-out broom, their entire existence reduced to nothing more than a minor inconvenience. Royal fashion might have dazzled the court and impressed visiting dignitaries, but for servants, it represented a living nightmare of epic proportions. Queens were expected to wear enormous gowns, constructed from the finest silk, luxurious velvet, and intricate embroidery that took months to complete. These weren't simply dresses, they were architectural feats of engineering that could weigh over 30 pounds, making them as cumbersome and difficult for servants to handle as they were for the queens themselves to wear. Here's the absolutely worst part. These elaborate garments were rarely, if ever, properly washed. Instead, servants had to painstakingly air them out for hours, brush away accumulated dirt and debris, and douse them with expensive perfumes in a desperate attempt to mask the overwhelming odor of sweat and decay that had soaked deep into the expensive fabrics. The situation with undergarments was even more disturbing than you could possibly imagine. Queens might wear the exact same set of underclothes for days, sometimes even weeks, without bothering to change them. By the time a servant was finally allowed to remove these garments, they would often discover angry red rashes, festering open sores, or serious infections caused by the complete lack of basic cleanliness. Servants were expected to handle these revolting, soiled clothes with steady hands and professional composure, even as the nauseating stench clung to their skin and clothing long after the horrific work was completed. Life as a servant wasn't just physically exhausting. It represented absolute servitude in its purest form. From the moment the sun rose until long after it had set, your entire existence revolved completely around your queen's endless needs and demands. There were no weekends to look forward to, no holidays to celebrate, and certainly no days off to rest your aching body. Sleep became a precious luxury that you rarely enjoyed, and the meager wages you received barely kept you alive from one day to the next. Privacy simply didn't exist in your world. Your life was not your own. It belonged entirely to her. If the queen decided to call for you in the middle of the night because she needed something trivial, you came running immediately, no matter how exhausted or sick you might be feeling. If she ordered you to hold her chamber pot while she relieved herself right in front of you, you obeyed without flinching or showing any sign of disgust. There was absolutely no such thing as saying no to any request, and the consequences for failure were swift and brutal. You might wonder why these servants didn't simply pack up and leave this nightmare behind. But for most servants, the harsh reality was that life beyond those palace gates was often even more brutal and unforgiving. Inside the palace walls, they at least had a roof over their heads and something to eat, even if it was nothing more than stale bread or scraps left over from the royal table. Walking away from their positions meant facing a world where poverty, hunger, and homelessness were almost guaranteed outcomes. There were no safety nets waiting to catch them, no charitable organizations ready to provide assistance. For many desperate people, working in the palace represented the lesser of two terrible evils. But that choice came at a devastating cost that few modern people could truly comprehend. Servants lived in constant exposure to filth and disease, their bodies gradually breaking down from years of relentless physical labor. Malnutrition weakened their immune systems, making even minor illnesses potentially deadly. Many never lived long enough to see old age. Their lives simply burned out under the crushing weight of endless service. How did these servants manage to endure such harsh, unforgiving conditions day after day? The truth is that many simply learned to shut down parts of themselves emotionally in order to survive. Some carried small pouches filled with herbs, dried flowers, or scented cloths, tucked discreetly into their sleeves or pockets, desperately trying to mask the horrific stench that clung to their daily work like an invisible curse. Others found precious solace in their fellow servants, forming deep, meaningful bonds with the only people who truly understood their shared struggles and suffering. In a world where their voices didn't matter, and their humanity was constantly questioned, these friendships became genuine lifelines, small pockets of authentic humanity, surviving in an otherwise completely merciless existence. So the next time you settle in to watch a movie featuring a glamorous queen gracefully strolling through a sparkling palace, remember the brutal reality that history often chooses to hide from us. Behind her carefully constructed beauty and practiced elegance stood an invisible army of servants, the forgotten people emptying disgusting chamber pots in the dead of night, painstakingly combing lice from her unwashed hair, scrubbing hopelessly soiled clothes, and enduring unimaginable filth so that she could appear absolutely flawless before the watching world. It's easy to admire and romanticize the royal life when you're viewing it from a safe distance. But here's my challenge to you. Would you have survived as a servant during those times? Could you have endured the endless backbreaking labor, lived with the constant fear of severe punishment, and faced the deadly diseases lurking in every corner of those magnificent palaces? Or would you have run for your life the very moment someone handed you your first chamber pot full of royal waste? Tell me honestly in the comments below. I genuinely want to hear your thoughts on this brutal reality. And if you found yourself shocked by these unspoken truths from history, don't forget to like this video, subscribe for more eye-opening content, and share this story with others who need to know the real price of royal glamour. Trust me when I say there's so much more darkness from the past just waiting to be revealed.